This was a large antique shop, and the owner had a great talent for decoration. The walls were draped in deep red velvet, and the lighting fixtures were all made to look like antique bamboo lamps. The soft, thread-like glow felt like it had traveled through a tunnel of time, telling stories from long ago. The hall was filled with many items from small jade and ceramics to large tables, beds, and screens, all arranged in an aesthetically pleasing manner. Walking slowly among them, one could truly savor the nostalgic melancholy of ancient times. Sean stumbled upon this antique shop quite by chance. Sean had no interest in or knowledge of antiques, but that day, after a fierce argument with his wife, who had packed her suitcase and threatened to leave him for good, he found himself wandering aimlessly to avoid further conflict. In his aimless wandering, he unknowingly walked into the antique shop. At first, Sean just idly browsing, not really paying attention. But as he went further inside, his eyes widened with fascination. For the first time, he found these items incredibly captivating. Each piece, steeped in history, seemed to come alive, stirring something deep within him. The deeper he went, the more excited he became. When he reached the section with antique furniture, his excitement peaked. At that moment, the shop owner approached him. "Hello, sir, I'm the owner here. Feel free to look around. Those who know us well are aware that our antique furniture is the best among our collection." "Oh, I don't know much about antiques. Could you tell me more about them?" Sean asked. "Of course. Take this table, for instance. It's over 300 years old, made of rosewood. Look at the width of the table surface. It's quite exceptional for rosewood." The owner continued to walk with Sean, explaining the pieces in detail. Sean moved closer at times to inspect the items, his eyes wide with amazement, trying to take in all the details of the various heights and shapes of the furniture. Sean sometimes leaned in to closely examine what the owner was describing, and other times he stepped back, gazing in awe. He wished he could take in every detail of the furniture, arranged at different heights and depths. At that moment, something suddenly caught Sean's eye. "Please, wait. Look at this screen," Sean interrupted the owner, his gaze fixed ahead. Against the far wall, there stood a solitary cabinet, perhaps because it was placed on its own. The cabinet looked strikingly different from all the other furniture. It was over 1 meter high and nearly 2 meters long, completely black. The top part of the cabinet was open on 3 sides, and the bottom part had 2 cabinet doors with hinges and handles that gleamed faintly. Most intriguingly, every inch of the cabinet was covered in mysterious carvings. These carvings were curvy and round, completely different from those on any other piece of furniture. They seemed to have been touched many times, as the engravings were smooth and rounded, with some parts almost worn down. Sean stared at the cabinet, captivated. He had a feeling that his wife would love it. "Excuse me, what is this black cabinet? How old is it, and what is the price?" Sir. Sean turned to see the owner, who was staring at him with a half-open, rigid mouth. The owner stared blankly at Sean. "Are you okay? Not feeling well?" Sean asked. "Hey, boss?" Oh. The owner snapped out of his daze. "You mean that black cabinet, right? The one with the carvings and the open compartments on top, against the wall?" Sean walked over and opened the cabinet doors. A strange, indescribable smell wafted out. Inside, the cabinet was divided into 2 sections, a long open compartment on top and 4 drawers on the bottom. "What's the story with this cabinet?" Sean asked. "I'm sorry, sir, but this cabinet is not for sale." "What do you mean, not for sale? You have so many different cabinets here. Why not this one?" "Well, it's not that. It's just that the price might be too high for you." "Oh, really? How much are we talking about?" "It's around $300,000. That's quite expensive. But let me tell you, I have a habit of keeping things I like, no matter what it takes. So tell me, when can I pay for it? Besides, what's a few $100,000? All right, just tell me when I can make the payment." "I'm sorry, sir. I don't mean to offend you," the owner said. "Never mind. Let me be honest with you. I actually don't want you to have this cabinet because it's considered unlucky." "Unlucky? It's just a wooden cabinet. Don't make silly excuses. I've decided to buy it today. So, do I pay now or later?" "Oh, right, sir. Since you insist on having this cabinet, you don't need to pay now. Just leave your address and I'll have it delivered to your home tomorrow." The next evening, when Sean returned home, the cabinet was already placed in the living room. His wife was indeed very pleased with it. She stood in front of the cabinet, gently caressing the carvings. Sean walked over and gave her a warm smile. In that instant, all their arguments from the previous day vanished. In the following days, Sean and his wife returned to their usual loving relationship. She stopped complaining about his lack of attention, and he no longer worried about losing her. His wife no longer complained about Sean's lack of attention, and Sean stopped worrying about possibly losing his beloved wife. Every day when Sean came home from work, he would find his wife engrossed in lovingly caressing the carvings on the cabinet. Gradually, Sean grew deeply appreciative of the cabinet. However, a few days later, one night after midnight, Sean was suddenly awakened by a strange laugh. Reaching out to touch his wife, he found that she was not in bed. Sitting up, he listened carefully. To his astonishment, the sound seemed to be coming from the living room, and it sounded like his wife's laugh. Sean gently pushed open the bedroom door and slowly walked down the hallway towards the living room. Peeking in, he was stunned. He saw his wife sitting on the sofa in front of the cabinet, laughing inexplicably to herself. What's going on? Is she sleepwalking? He wondered as he cautiously approached her. Sean quietly approached his wife from behind. But just as he was about to reach out and tap her shoulder, her laughter abruptly stopped. The sudden silence startled Sean. He stood there, unsure of what to do, staring at his wife's back. Then something even more unbelievable happened. His wife started talking to herself.
I can't believe this is so interesting. Yeah, you're really telling the truth?
She said,
Looking at the cabinet as if it were a person.
Sean felt a shiver run down his spine. He clutched the back of the sofa, anxiously glancing at the cabinet. Just then, his wife spoke again.
It's actually not complicated at all. It's very easy to do. So fascinating. I can't believe.
She stopped mid-sentence. Instinctively, Sean looked down and realized his hand was pressing on a strand of her hair. He quickly let go. At that moment, his wife slowly turned around from the sofa. Sean stood frozen, staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. Her face, emerging from behind her long hair, appeared in slow motion like a close-up in a horror movie. Her face slowly came into view.
Sean, when did you wake up? Honey, what are you doing? Did I scare you?
She asked. Are you dreaming? Why were you talking and laughing at the cabinet?
Do I look like I'm dreaming?
She responded.
Sean, sit down. I need to tell you something important. I discovered the cabinet secret.
Sean sat down, his face full of curiosity as he looked at his wife.
That afternoon, the delivery people brought this cabinet in. I immediately felt it was not an ordinary piece. There's something very alluring about it. Many times I would sit on this sofa, staring intently at the carvings on the cabinet. The longer I looked, the stronger the feeling became, the feeling that those carvings were alive.
She said. Really? Sean asked, incredulous.
Yes. As I stared intently at those carvings, several times I even heard a mysterious voice. The voice said to me, yes, keep looking at me. I can tell you things beyond your imagination. So I walked up to the cabinet and carefully touched the carvings. At that moment, I felt the mysterious voice coming closer. It was right next to my ear. The voice was deep and strong. I could hear it clearly. It was coming from inside the cabinet. At first, I was scared, but now I've gotten used to it. Every day, I carefully caress those intricate carvings. The most crucial part is I can always hear that magical voice. I need to thank that voice. Really, without it, I wouldn't be here. Without it, I wouldn't be here. Without that voice, I would leave you. Without that voice, there would be no me.
She said, her voice becoming more intense. Sean was stunned. What does the voice say?
It says, today you will die.
Suddenly, she stood up straight, her face contorted like a zombie, her arms rigid. Sean wanted to get up and run, but he suddenly felt as though his body no longer belonged to him. He felt himself becoming lighter and moving involuntarily towards the cabinet. At that moment, the cabinet doors opened and the strange smell from the antique shop wafted out again. Honey, why is this happening? Why? Sean cried out. Lie inside, lie inside, lie inside, lie inside, the voice commanded. repeating over and over. Just then, the door suddenly opened, the sound of the unlocking particularly jarring in the midnight silence. Sean whipped his head around to look at the door. To his shock, he saw his wife standing in the doorway. Sean stared at her, stunned, as she stared back at him from the entrance. Suddenly, he felt a jolt, like an electric shock, and he snapped back to reality. "Oh my God," Sean realized. "All these nights at home, I've been trapped in a delusional fantasy." The day they had their fierce argument, his wife had said,
"You never truly care about me. Honey, don't go. It's you who pushed me to leave. I'm leaving."
She had shouted.
"Please, honey, put down the suitcase and give me another chance, okay?"
His wife had stormed out, slamming the door behind her, leaving Sean nearly in despair. After a while, he thought he saw the door open again, but in reality it hadn't. It was just his mind playing tricks on him in his state of hopelessness. He then imagined his wife walking back into the house. To avoid a direct confrontation, he wandered the streets aimlessly. The real world existed only when he stepped out of his home. The moment he returned, the fantasy began again. In his mind, he reconciled with his wife, who became infatuated with the beautiful cabinet. All of it was his delusion. He had a peculiar obsession. Anything he liked, he would go to any lengths to keep. Over the past few days, he had been talking to thin air, waking up in the middle of the night to gaze lovingly at a pillow, believing it was his wife smiling in her sleep. With a wooden expression, Sean stiffly turned his head back to look at the spot where his hallucinated wife had been. She was gone. At the same time, Sean almost lost his breath in shock. In front of the sofa, there was nothing but the stark white wall of the living room. The black cabinet had vanished. The next day, Sean returned to the antique shop. To his surprise, he found that it had a new owner. After confirming Sean's identity, the new owner handed him a letter, which had been left for him by the previous proprietor. "Hello. First of all, I want to sincerely congratulate you. If you are reading this letter, it means you are still alive. Or rather, you are still yourself. The cabinet you insisted on obtaining is something I acquired 20 years ago from a very secluded village in the southwestern region. The place was quite isolated and had preserved some unique customs and traditions over the years. The cabinet is called a soul cabinet in that area and is specifically used in the village's communal mourning hall to honor the dead. When someone dies, their body, along with their personal belongings, is placed inside the cabinet. The open compartment at the top is used to place offerings. The deceased stays in the cabinet for 3 days to receive the villagers' tributes. During these 3 days, the local shaman leads the villagers in performing a traditional and solemn ritual. They carve a pattern on the thick walls of the cabinet that belongs to the deceased, then smear the carvings with the deceased's blood. Throughout the entire process, the shaman chants an ancient and mysterious incantation. It is said that this process allows the deceased's relatives to communicate with the spirits of the dead through the cabinet in the days to come. Additionally, according to local lore, the cabinet can also be used for another purpose, a special ritual that releases the spirits trapped within. Simple terms, this ritual enables the dead to return to the world of the living by possessing the body of a living person. However, this is an evil practice, and the shaman is always wary of it. 20 years ago, I was obsessed with ancient artifacts to the point of madness. I traveled far and wide, collecting everything I could. When I arrived at that village, I was immediately captivated by the cabinet you saw. It had been used by the villagers' ancestors many years ago. The shaman had painted it black with a local substance and kept it in his home. I was desperate to obtain the cabinet, but the shaman refused to give it to me. In the end, I resorted to a very deceitful method to steal it. After that, my business prospered, but my health deteriorated. I was plagued by illness and tormented by nightmares every night. I realized that I had fallen victim to the shaman's curse. 10 years ago, I painfully destroyed the cabinet, breaking it into pieces and burning it. But the horror didn't end there. One day, a man came into my shop, pointed to a spot next to the counter, and said he wanted to buy the black cabinet. He described it vividly, just like you did that day, matching the soul cabinet I had destroyed down to the smallest detail. But That cabinet had already been destroyed, and the spot he pointed to was clearly empty. I was terrified, but I tried to play along. I told him it wasn't priced yet, and that he should come back later. The next day, the man eagerly returned and thanked me, claiming I had delivered the cabinet to his home. He even brought a thick stack of money to pay for it. But how could I have delivered a cabinet that no longer existed? After some time, I learned from others that the man had changed. He was no longer the person he used to be, almost as if he had become an entirely different individual. Some said he was possessed, but I knew he had fallen victim to the cabinet's curse. Because of me, the evil within the cabinet had been unleashed. A poor soul from many years ago had returned, while the man's own spirit had died. It is my fault that the cabinet's malevolent power has grown. This is why you were able to see it and why it found its way back to my shop despite being destroyed. Only those who are deeply troubled or unbalanced can see it, and the cabinet preys on such individuals, allowing the spirits trapped within to replace them. However, the nightmare did not end there. I discovered that the cabinet always reappeared in some corner of my antique shop. No matter where I relocated my store, eventually someone would come in, find that exact spot, and inquire about the non-existent cabinet as if it were a treasure. I realized that only those who were mentally disturbed or deeply troubled could see it. Or perhaps the cabinet itself actively sought out such individuals, drawing them in to take it home and ultimately replace the decaying spirits within. Such people were likely more susceptible to its malevolent power. For example, the first person who saw the cabinet years ago had just lost his 4-year-old son. His extreme grief made him an ideal target. So, in a sense, it wasn't you who chose the cabinet. It was the cabinet that chose you. This is all I have to say. Writing these words has given me a bit of relief from my lifelong guilt. By the time you read this letter, I will no longer be in this world. I hope that through my death, I can end this horrific nightmare. Even if it doesn't, it's the only way I know to atone for my sins. I hope this letter finds its reader. A guilty man, Sean, let out a long sigh. Last night, if his wife had returned just a moment later, that cursed cabinet would have turned him into a living dead man. Cold sweat, hot tears, and relief all streamed down his face as he hastily folded the letter and put it back into the envelope, careful not to stain the final, desperate words.